The gunshots echoing through the small town of Pendleton, Oregon sent Leila Evans sprinting down the dusty Main Street, her heart pounding in her chest like a wild Mustang. Blood trickled from a graze on her arm, staining her once pristine blue dress as she desperately searched for anywhere to hide from the men pursuing her. The year was 1884, and Leila had made the grave mistake of witnessing something she shouldn't have. She'd been closing up her father's small general store when she saw the town's corrupt deputy sheriff and 3 other men dragging the new schoolteacher into an alley. What followed was a brutal beating over an alleged gambling debt. When the teacher stopped moving, panic filled their faces. That's when they spotted Leila watching from the store window. Now they wanted her silenced. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as she ran past the saloon and the blacksmith shop. Leila spotted the Peterson family's barn at the edge of town, its weathered doors slightly ajar. With no time to formulate a better plan, she slipped inside, the cool shadow of the interior momentarily blinding her after the harsh sunlight. The barn smelled of hay, horses, and leather. She climbed the wooden ladder to the hayloft with trembling hands, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Leila burrowed deep into the prickly hay, trying to make herself as small as possible, praying they wouldn't think to look for her here. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Every creak of the barn, every rustle outside sent fresh waves of terror through her. The wound on her arm throbbed, and she pressed her hand against it, trying to stem the bleeding. The sound of the barn door swinging open sent ice through her veins. Heavy footsteps echoed on the wooden planks below. Leila held her breath, pressing deeper into the hay, willing herself to become invisible. The footsteps paused. Then, to her horror, she heard the creak of weight on the ladder rungs. "I know someone's up here," a deep voice called out, not unkindly. "I can see the blood drops on the ladder." Leila remained frozen, tears tracking silently down her dust-streaked face. A tall figure emerged at the edge of the hayloft. Sunlight streaming through the cracks in the barn wall illuminated him from behind, casting his face in shadow. All she could make out was broad shoulders, a Stetson hat, and the glint of what might have been a badge on his vest. The man stepped forward, finally coming into view. He wasn't one of her pursuers. This man had kind eyes set in a weathered face, a strong jawline covered with several days' worth of stubble, and an expression of genuine concern. "Madam," he said softly, crouching down a respectful distance from her hiding spot. "You're bleeding. I'm not here to hurt you." When she didn't respond, he slowly removed his hat, revealing thick dark hair streaked with premature silver at the temples. "My name's Roy Jenkins. I'm passing through on my way north with my cattle. This is my friend's property." He gestured to the barn around them. "Whatever trouble you're in, you don't need to be afraid of me." Leila still didn't move, her eyes wide with fear and suspicion. Roy sighed and sat down cross-legged on the hayloft floor, placing his hat beside him in a gesture meant to appear non-threatening. "I heard gunshots in town. Figured it wasn't my business, but then I saw you running this way. You looked scared half to death." He reached slowly into his pocket and pulled out a clean handkerchief. "For your arm," he explained, extending it toward her but not coming any closer. "You're safe here with me, I promise you that." Something in his voice, a steadiness, a quiet certainty, made Leila want to believe him. She had few options. She was injured, exhausted, and terrified. With shaking hands, she reached out and took the handkerchief. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What's your name?" He asked gently. Leila Evans." "Miss Evans, I don't know what kind of trouble you're in, but I reckon you could use some help. Are you willing to tell me who's after you?" Leila pressed the handkerchief to her wound, wincing. "Deputy Hargrove and his men, I saw them. They killed someone, I think. The schoolteacher. When they realized I saw, they came after me. Roy's expression darkened. Hargrove. I've heard that name since arriving in town, not much good attached to it. He glanced toward the barn door. We should tend to that wound properly and then figure out what to do next. Can you walk? Leila nodded hesitantly. She emerged fully from the hay, brushing golden strands from her hair and clothes. Standing revealed her to be of medium height, with honey-brown hair falling in disheveled waves around a face pale with fear but striking nonetheless. My ranch is about 3 miles north of town, Roy said. I have supplies there, food, and it's defensible if need be. I can take you there until we sort this out. Why would you help me? Leila asked, suspicion returning to her voice. You don't know me. Roy looked at her steadily. My pa raised me to never turn away from someone in need, especially not a lady. Besides, if what you say about Hargrove is true, then someone needs to stand up to him. He paused. I've got a wagon out back. We can slip out without going back through town. Leila hesitated. Trusting a stranger seemed dangerous, but staying here meant certain discovery. The deputy and his men would search every building in town eventually. All right, she finally said, but I need to get word to my father somehow. He'll be worried sick when he finds the store empty. We'll figure something out, Roy assured her. He stood and offered his hand to help her up. After a moment's pause, Leila took it, noting the strength and calluses of his palm, the hand of a man who worked hard for his living. They descended the ladder carefully, with Roy going first to make sure the coast was clear. The barn remained silent except for the soft nickering of horses in their stalls. Roy led her to a back door that opened away from the town. Wait here, he whispered, stepping outside to scan the surroundings. He returned moments later. My wagon's just around the corner. Can you run if you need to? Leila nodded, though exhaustion was beginning to set in. Stay close, Roy instructed, and together they slipped out of the barn. The wagon was hidden behind a stand of cottonwoods, a sturdy vehicle pulled by 2 strong draft horses. Roy helped Leila climb up to the seat, then quickly untied the horses and took his place beside her. Keep your head down, he said, flicking the reins gently. The horses moved forward at a walk, not drawing attention with sudden speed. There's a blanket behind the seat if you want to cover yourself. Leila pulled the rough wool blanket around her shoulders despite the afternoon heat, trying to make herself less recognizable. As they began to move away from town, following a side trail rather than the main road, she allowed herself a small breath of relief. Thank you, she said quietly. Roy nodded, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. Don't thank me yet, Miss Evans. We're not in the clear. They traveled in tense silence for nearly a mile, the only sounds the creak of the wagon wheels and the steady clip-clop of hooves on the packed dirt. Leila's mind raced with questions. Who was this cowboy? Could she truly trust him? What would happen to her father when the deputy couldn't find her? As if reading her thoughts, Roy spoke. Once we're at the ranch, I'll send one of my men into town. He can get word to your father discreetly. You have men working for you, just a few hands to help with the cattle. Good men, loyal. He glanced at her. The ranch isn't much, but it's growing. Started with just 50 head 3 years ago. Now I'm up to nearly 300. You're not just passing through then, Leila observed. A small smile touched Roy's lips. Not exactly. The ranch is about 20 miles north. I come to Pendleton for supplies every few weeks. Was staying with my friend Peterson while conducting some business. He adjusted his hat against the sun. I'm sorry about the deception. Wasn't sure how much to tell a scared woman hiding in a hayloft. Before Leila could respond, Roy suddenly tensed. Riders coming, he said quietly, nodding toward a dust cloud visible on the main road running parallel to their trail. Get down. Leila slid from the seat to the floor of the wagon, pulling the blanket over herself completely. Roy continued driving at the same steady pace, appearing to be nothing more than a rancher heading home after business in town. The sound of galloping horses grew louder, then began to fade as the riders passed on the main road without turning onto their trail. Once they were out of sight, Roy gave the all-clear. "Deputy and 2 others," he confirmed as Leila climbed back onto the seat. "Heading out of town, looking for you no doubt." Leila's hands trembled as she adjusted the blanket around her shoulders. "They'll kill me if they find me." "Just like they killed Mr. Cooper." "Cooper, the school teacher," she nodded. "He'd only been in town 3 months. They claimed he owed gambling debts, but everyone knew he was courting the daughter of a man Hargrove wanted for himself." Roy's jaw tightened. "Sounds like the deputy's got too much power and not enough conscience." He glanced at her. "When we get to the ranch, you can tell me everything. For now, let's focus on getting there safely." They continued north, eventually turning onto a wider trail that showed signs of regular use. After another mile, Roy pointed ahead. "That ridge there marks the southern boundary of my property. Another mile and we'll reach the house." The landscape had changed subtly, the flat plains giving way to gently rolling hills covered with bunch grass perfect for grazing cattle. In the distance, Leila could make out a line of cottonwoods that suggested a creek or small river. As they crested a rise, a modest but well-built ranch house came into view. Set against a backdrop of hills and surrounded by several outbuildings, it looked both inviting and defensible. A corral near the main house held several horses, and in the distance, Leila could see the dark shapes of cattle grazing. A man emerged from one of the outbuildings as they approached, raising a hand in greeting. As they drew closer, Leila saw he was older, perhaps in his 60s, with a weathered face and a white mustache. "That's Hank," Roy explained. "Been with me since I started this place. Fought alongside my father in the war." The wagon rolled to a stop in front of the house, and Roy set the brake before jumping down. He came around to Leila's side and offered his hand to help her down. "Boss," Hank called as he approached, his eyes curious but not unfriendly as they took in Leila's disheveled appearance and blood-stained dress. "Didn't expect you back so soon, or with company." "Hank, this is Miss Leila Evans," Roy said. "She's in some trouble and needs our help." "Miss Evans, this is Hank Thornton, my foreman and right hand." "Madam," Hank touched the brim of his hat respectfully, though his eyes narrowed at the sight of her injury. "You're hurt." "It's just a graze," Leila said, suddenly self-conscious about her appearance. "Let's get inside," Roy suggested. "Hank, where are the others? Matt and Lewis are out checking the north pasture fence. Won't be back till supper." "Tom's in the barn fixing tack," Roy nodded. "Good, come inside with us, we need to talk." The interior of the ranch house was surprisingly comfortable. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a large stone fireplace along one wall, a solid wooden table with 6 chairs, and several comfortable-looking armchairs. Everything was clean and orderly, if simple. "Sit down," Roy gestured to the table. "I'll get some water and bandages for that arm." While Roy gathered supplies, Hank pulled out a chair for Leila. "Don't worry, miss," he said quietly. "You're in good hands with Roy Jenkins. No finer man between here and the Mississippi." Roy returned with a basin of water, clean cloths, and a small wooden box containing medical supplies. "Let's have a look at that wound," he said, setting everything on the table. Leila carefully pulled back her torn sleeve, revealing a bloody furrow across her upper arm. Roy examined it gently. "Bullet just grazed you. Looks worse than it is, but we should clean it properly." He soaked a cloth in water and began carefully washing away the dried blood. His touch was surprisingly gentle for a man with such large, work roughened hands. As he worked, Leila told them everything how she'd been closing her father's store when she witnessed the attack on the schoolteacher, how Deputy Hargrove had seen her watching, and the subsequent chase through town that ended with her hiding in the hayloft. "My father will be frantic by now," she said worriedly. "The store was supposed to be closed hours ago." "Hank can ride into town," Roy said, applying a salve to her cleaned wound. "He can get word to your father without drawing attention." "The deputy knows all the ranch hands around here," Hank pointed out. "Not if you go in after dark," Roy countered, "and not if you don't look like yourself." He turned to Leila. "Where does your father live?" "Above the store. Evans General Merchandise on Main Street." "There's a back entrance through the alley." She hesitated. "My father's not well, his heart. The doctor says he shouldn't get excited or upset." Roy finished bandaging her arm. "Hank will be careful. He'll just let your father know you're safe without giving details that might put him in danger." He looked at his foreman. "You'll go tonight?" Hank nodded. "I'll take the gray mare. She's quiet and fast if needed." "In the meantime," Roy said, turning back to Leila, "you need rest and food. When did you last eat?" Leila realized with surprise that she hadn't eaten since breakfast. "This morning, I suppose." "I'll fix something," Hank offered, moving to the stove. "We've got stew left from last night." While Hank busied himself with the food, Roy showed Leila to a small bedroom off the main room. "You can rest here. It's not much, but it's clean. There's a wash basin and towels if you want to freshen up." The room was simple but comfortable, with a narrow bed covered in a handmade quilt, a small dresser, and a window overlooking the ranch yard. "Whose room is this?" Leila asked. "Mine, actually," Roy admitted. "But I'll bunk with the hands tonight. You need the privacy more than I do." "I can't take your room," she protested. "You can and you will," he said firmly but not unkindly. "You've been through enough today without having to worry about your accommodations." Before she could argue further, he stepped back. "I'll leave you to rest. Come out when you're ready for some food." Left alone, Leila sank onto the edge of the bed, the events of the day catching up with her in a wave of exhaustion. She looked down at her bloodstained, torn dress and sighed. Using the water in the basin, she did her best to clean up, washing the dust from her face and hands. The room offered few personal insights about Roy Jenkins. A book of poetry on the nightstand surprised her, as did a framed photograph of a handsome older couple she assumed were his parents. Otherwise, the room was as straightforward and unadorned as the man himself seemed to be. After resting for a short while, Leila made her way back to the main room, where Roy and Hank were seated at the table. A steaming bowl of stew awaited her. "Feel any better?" Roy asked as she took a seat. "Yes, thank you." She looked down at her ruined dress, "though I'm afraid I'm not exactly presentable." "I've sent Tom to fetch Sarah," Hank said. "She might have some clothes that would fit you." "Sarah, Tom's wife," Roy explained. "They live in the smaller cabin about a quarter-mile down the creek. She helps with cooking when we're busy with cattle work." They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the stew simple but hearty and flavorful. Leila hadn't realized how hungry she was until she started eating. "Miss Evans," Roy said after a while, "we need to decide what to do next. Hiding you here temporarily is one thing, but we need a plan for dealing with Hargrove." "I should go to the marshal in La Grande," Leila said. "Tell him what I saw." Roy and Hank exchanged looks. "Marshal Wilson is a good man," Hank agreed. "But he's 3 days' ride from here, and Hargrove has friends along the way." "What about written testimony?" Roy suggested. "You could write down everything you saw, sign it, and we could get it to Wilson without you having to make the journey." "Would that be enough?" Leila asked doubtfully. "Maybe not on its own," Roy admitted, "but it would be a start. if Wilson comes to investigate and finds Cooper's body with the injuries you described. He didn't finish the sentence. If Cooper's body hasn't disappeared, Hank muttered darkly. A knock at the door interrupted their discussion. Hank rose to answer it, revealing a petite woman with auburn hair pulled back in a practical bun. She carried a bundle of clothing. "This is Sarah," Hank introduced her. "Sarah, this is Miss Evans." "Please call me Leila," she said, standing to greet the newcomer. Sarah's kind eyes took in Leila's condition at a glance. "Tom told me you needed some help," she said, stepping forward with a warm smile. "I brought some clothes that might fit you. They're nothing fancy, but they're clean and whole." "Thank you," Leila said sincerely. "That's very kind." "Why don't you go try these on?" Sarah suggested, handing her the bundle. "Then we can see what adjustments might be needed." When Leila returned to Roy's room to change, she found the clothes simple but well made: a calico skirt, a white cotton blouse, and a light shawl. They were slightly large on her slender frame, but infinitely better than her ruined dress. She returned to find Sarah waiting alone in the main room. "The men have gone to prepare for Hank's trip to town," she explained. "I thought you might appreciate some female company for a change." Leila smiled gratefully. "I do, thank you." Sarah helped her adjust the clothes with a few strategically placed pins. "Roy told me a little about your situation," she said as she worked. "You're very brave." "I don't feel brave," Leila admitted. "I feel frightened and overwhelmed." "That's perfectly natural," Sarah assured her. "But running from armed men and standing up for what's right takes courage, whether you feel it or not." Leila studied the other woman curiously. "Have you known Roy long?" "About 3 years, since he first bought this place. My Tom was one of his first hires." Sarah's eyes twinkled. "He's a good man, Roy Jenkins, the best kind, honest and fair. The men would follow him anywhere. He's certainly been kind to me, a complete stranger." "That's his way," Sarah said simply. "Now let's get your hair brushed out. You'll feel more yourself with everything in order." By the time the men returned, Leila looked considerably more composed. The borrowed clothes fit reasonably well after Sarah's adjustments, and her honey-brown hair had been neatly braided. Roy paused momentarily in the doorway, his eyes registering the transformation. "You look recovered, Miss Evans," he said, a hint of admiration in his voice. "Thank you for sending for Sarah," Leila replied. "She's been very kind." Hank entered behind Roy, now dressed in plain, nondescript clothing that made him look more like a drifter than a ranch foreman. "I'm ready to head out," he announced. "Should reach town by midnight if I push it." "Remember," Roy instructed, "just find her father, tell him she's safe, and get out. Don't engage with anyone else, especially not Hargrove or his men." Hank nodded. "I know how to keep my head down." He turned to Leila. "Any message for your father beyond that you're safe?" Leila thought for a moment. Tell him I'm with friends who are helping me and that I'll come home as soon as it's safe. Tell him not to worry about me, but to be careful himself." "I'll deliver it word for word," Hank promised. After Hank departed, Tom and his wife left for their cabin, promising to return in the morning. The house grew quiet, with only the occasional pop from the fireplace breaking the silence. Outside, darkness had fallen completely, wrapping the ranch in a blanket of night. "You should get some sleep," Roy suggested, noticing Leila stifling a yawn. "It's been a long day." "What about you?" she asked. "I still don't feel right taking your room." "I'll be fine," he assured her. "I've slept in the bunkhouse plenty of times." Leila hesitated. "Mr. Jenkins, Roy," he corrected her with a small smile. "If we're going to be standing against a corrupt deputy together, we might as well use first names." "Roy," she amended. "I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done today." "No thanks needed. Anyone decent would have done the same." "I don't believe that's true," Leila said softly. Most people would have looked the other way. It was easier, safer. Roy's expression grew serious. Maybe. But I've never much cared for easy or safe when it comes at the expense of doing what's right. Their eyes held for a long moment. Leila felt a curious warmth spreading through her chest, something beyond gratitude. There was something about this quiet, principled man that drew her to him. "Good night, Roy," she finally said, "and thank you again." "Good night, Leila. Try not to worry too much. We'll figure this out together." In the small bedroom, Leila climbed into the unfamiliar bed, surrounded by the faint scent of leather and pine that she was beginning to associate with Roy Jenkins. Despite the danger that still lurked, despite her worries for her father, she felt strangely secure. For the first time since witnessing the schoolteacher's murder, she believed she might find a way through this nightmare. Outside, Roy sat on the porch, rifle across his knees, watching the darkness. He had meant what he said about helping Leila stand against Hargrove, but he hadn't expected the fierce protectiveness he now felt toward her. There was something special about Leila Evans, a quiet strength beneath her fear, a determination in those amber eyes. He would keep her safe, whatever it took, and together they would find a way to bring justice for the murdered schoolteacher. As for the unexpected feelings stirring within him, those would have to wait. For now, keeping her alive took precedence over everything else. Roy sat there late into the night, listening to the familiar sounds of his ranch and thinking about the extraordinary woman who had unexpectedly entered his life, hiding in a hayloft with courage in her heart and fear in her eyes. The morning sun filtered through the small window, rousing Leila from a surprisingly deep sleep. For a moment, she was disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings, but then the events of the previous day came rushing back. She was at Roy Jenkins' ranch, hiding from Deputy Hargrove and his men after witnessing their murder of the schoolteacher. She sat up, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at the wound on her arm. The bandage Roy had applied was still clean, suggesting the injury was healing well. Leila quickly dressed in Sarah's borrowed clothes and stepped out into the main room. The house was quiet but not empty. Roy stood at the stove, his back to her, tending to something that smelled wonderfully of coffee and bacon. He turned at the sound of her footsteps. "Good morning," he greeted her, a small smile softening his weathered features. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I expected," Leila admitted. "Has Hank returned?" Roy shook his head. "Not yet. Should be back mid-morning if all went well." He gestured to the table, already set for breakfast. "Hungry?" "Starving, actually," she said with surprise, realizing it was true. "Good. Fear tends to kill the appetite, so hunger's a good sign." He served up a hearty breakfast of bacon, eggs, and biscuits, alongside strong black coffee. Leila found herself ravenous, cleaning her plate quickly. "Thank you," she said when she'd finished. "I haven't had a breakfast like that since my mother passed." "When was that?" Roy asked gently. 5 years ago. I was 19. She caught a fever in the winter and never recovered." Leila's eyes grew distant with the memory. "My father and I have managed the store since then, just the two of us. No siblings," she shook her head. "My mother lost 2 babies before me and 1 after. I'm all they got." A shadow crossed her face. "My father, he hasn't been the same since Mother died. His heart started giving him trouble about 2 years ago. The doctor says he needs to avoid stress and exertion. And now this," Roy said with understanding. "All the more reason to resolve the situation quickly." A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Roy rose, his hand automatically moving to the revolver on his hip, a gesture Leila hadn't noticed him making before. "Who is it?" he called, positioning himself between Leila and the door. "It's Lewis," came the reply. "Got a visitor coming up the road. Looks like the marshal from Pendleton." Roy's expression hardened. "Get Matt and Tom. Tell them to be ready but not obvious about it." He turned to Leila. "You need to hide." "Where?" she asked, heart suddenly racing. Roy strode quickly to a corner of the room and pulled back a small rug, revealing a trapdoor. "Root cellar," he explained, lifting it. "Not comfortable, but it'll do in a pinch." Leila didn't hesitate, climbing down the narrow ladder into the cool darkness below. Roy handed down a lantern. "Stay quiet," he instructed. "I'll come get you when it's safe." He closed the trapdoor, and she heard the sound of the rug being replaced. The root cellar was small but not cramped, lined with shelves holding preserved foods and supplies. Leila set the lantern on a small table and listened intently to the muffled sounds above. She could make out the creak of the front door opening, followed by the indistinct murmur of voices. One belonged to Roy, steady and controlled. The other was unfamiliar, deeper, with an edge of authority. Minutes passed with Leila straining to hear what was being said. Occasionally, footsteps crossed overhead, suggesting movement around the house. Once, she thought she heard the visitor's voice raised in what might have been anger or accusation, but Roy's responses remained too low to distinguish. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 15 minutes, the footsteps moved toward the door. A final exchange, then the sound of the door closing firmly. Leila held her breath, waiting. The trapdoor lifted a few moments later, revealing Roy's face, his expression grim. "You can come up now," he said, offering his hand to help her climb out. It was Marshal Parker from Pendleton. "What did he want?" Leila asked as she emerged from the cellar. "He's looking for you," Roy confirmed her fears. "Says you're wanted for questioning about a disturbance in town yesterday." Leila's blood ran cold. "A disturbance? They killed a man." "I know," Roy said quietly. "Parker claimed the schoolteacher is missing, not dead. Said you were seen running from the scene of an altercation and are needed to clarify what happened." "That's not true," Leila protested. "I saw them beat him to death. They're covering it up." "I believe you," Roy assured her, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. "And I told Parker I hadn't seen anyone matching your description. He seemed to accept it, but..." "But what?" He looked around a bit more than was necessary, and he mentioned he'd be checking other ranches in the area. Roy's eyes narrowed. "He also said something about your father being concerned for your whereabouts." Fear gripped Leila's heart. "My father? Did they hurt him?" "Parker didn't suggest that, but we should be worried about Hank. If the marshal is out looking for you, Hargrove and his men will be watching your father's store." As if on cue, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention. Roy moved to the window, hand again resting on his revolver. "It's Hank," he reported with relief. "Alone." They met the foreman on the porch. Hank dismounted wearily, his face drawn with fatigue from the overnight ride. But there was something else in his expression, concern, perhaps even alarm. "Did you see the marshal on the road?" Roy asked immediately. Hank nodded. "Passed him about 2 miles back. Kept my head down, but I'm pretty sure he didn't recognize me." "Were you able to speak with my father?" Leila asked anxiously. "I was," Hank confirmed. "Found him at the store last night, closing up. He was worried sick about you, Miss Evans. I delivered your message exactly as you gave it." "How did he seem? Was he all right?" Hank hesitated. "He was relieved to hear you were safe, but there's something else. Something I need to tell you both inside." Once they were seated at the table, Hank accepted a cup of coffee from Roy with grateful hands before beginning his report. "Town's in an uproar," he said grimly. "The official story is that the schoolteacher, Cooper, got into a fight with some drifters and disappeared. Hargrove is claiming Miss Evans witnessed the fight and ran off in a panic. He's telling everyone he just wants to question her as a witness." "But that's not what has you worried," Roy observed shrewdly. "No." Hank took a deep breath. After I spoke with your father, Miss Evans, I decided to do a bit of looking around. Figured I might learn something useful. I was careful," he added, seeing Roy's expression. "Kept to the shadows, avoided the saloon where Hargrove's men would be drinking." "What did you discover?" Leila asked, dread building in her chest. "I overheard two men talking behind the livery. One was the undertaker, Simmons. The other I didn't recognize. They were arguing about a body." Hank's eyes met Leila's. "Cooper's body. The undertaker was refusing to handle it the way they wanted, said he wouldn't be part of a cover-up." "So Cooper is dead," Roy said quietly, just as Leila saw. "That's not all," Hank continued reluctantly. "The other man threatened Simmons. Said if he didn't cooperate, Evans and his daughter would be next." Leila gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "They threatened my father directly. Did you warn him?" Hank shook his head regretfully. "I'd already spoken to him by then, and approaching him again might have drawn attention. But I did swing back by the store on my way out of town. There was a light on upstairs, and I saw his shadow moving about. He was alive and well when I left, Miss Evans." "We need to get him out of there," Leila said urgently, half rising from her chair. "If they've threatened him, rushing back into town would be the worst thing you could do right now," Roy cautioned, gently guiding her back to her seat. "It would put both you and your father in immediate danger. I can't just sit here while my father's life is threatened." "And you won't," Roy promised. "But we need to be smart about this. Hargrove is clearly trying to cover up Cooper's murder. If he's threatened your father, it means he's desperate and dangerous." Leila buried her face in her hands, trying to think through her fear. "What do we do?" Roy and Hank exchanged looks. "We need evidence," Roy said finally. "Something concrete that proves Cooper was murdered and ties Hargrove to it, and we need to get your father somewhere safe without alerting the deputy." "The undertaker," Hank suggested. "Simmons." "He was reluctant to help with the cover-up. He might be willing to provide testimony." "It's risky approaching him," Roy warned. "He'll be watched." "What about Cooper's body?" Leila asked suddenly. "If we could find it." Roy nodded slowly. "If they're trying to cover up a murder, they would need to dispose of the body somewhere discreet." "The old silver mine," Hank suggested. "It's abandoned, about 5 miles east of town, remote enough that no one would stumble across anything hidden there accidentally." "It's worth investigating," Roy agreed. "But first, we need to get Mr. Evans to safety. Hank, do you think you could go back to town and bring him here without being seen?" "Might be tricky with the marshal and Hargrove's men looking for Miss Evans, but I could try. After dark would be best." "What about sending Lewis instead?" Roy suggested. "He's not known in town, and his Mexican appearance might actually help him blend in without raising suspicion." Hank considered this. That could work. He could approach the store as a customer, pass a note to Mr. Evans, and arrange to meet him outside town after dark. "I should write the note," Leila said. "My father would recognize my handwriting." Roy nodded. "Good. Lewis can leave this afternoon, which gives us time to check out the silver mine first." He turned to Hank. "Get some rest. You've been riding all night. I'll take Matt with me to the mine." "No," Leila said firmly. "I'm coming with you." Roy started to object, but something in her expression stopped him. "It could be dangerous," he warned instead. "I know," she acknowledged. "But I need to do this. For Mr. Cooper and for my father. I can't just hide while others take risks on my behalf." After a moment, Roy nodded his acceptance. "All right, but you follow my lead, no questions asked. If I say run, you run. Understood?" "Understood." While Hank went to get some much-needed sleep, Leila wrote a brief note to her father explaining the situation and urging him to trust Lewis and come to the ranch. Roy, meanwhile, prepared for their expedition to the mine, gathering supplies and weapons. "Can you ride?" he asked Leila as they prepared to leave. "Yes," she replied. "My father taught me when I was young. I don't get many opportunities these days, but I know how." Roy nodded approvingly. "Good. We'll take horses rather than the wagon, faster and less conspicuous." Matt, one of the ranch hands, joined them by the barn. He was a tall, lanky young man with intelligent eyes and a quiet demeanor. Roy quickly explained their mission. "We need to be back before dark," he concluded. "That's when Lewis will be heading to town to fetch Mr. Evans." "I understand, boss," Matt replied, his gaze curious but respectful as it flickered to Leila. Roy introduced them properly. "Miss Evans, this is Matthew Carlson, one of my most reliable hands. Matt, Miss Leila Evans." "Madam," Matt touched his hat politely. "Sorry about your troubles." "Thank you for your help, Mr. Carlson," Leila replied sincerely. The three of them set out shortly after, riding east across the rolling landscape. Roy had insisted Leila wear a hat and one of his own coats over her dress, partly for disguise and partly for protection against the sun. The day was warm but not oppressively hot, with a light breeze carrying the scent of sage and dust. As they rode, Leila found herself studying Roy Jenkins with growing curiosity. In the saddle, he sat with an easy confidence that spoke of years of horsemanship. His profile against the blue sky was strong and steady, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings for potential threats. "How long have you been ranching here?" she asked as they rode side by side, Matt following a short distance behind. "Built the house 3 years ago," Roy answered. "Bought the land from a widow who was moving east to live with her daughter after her husband passed. It was just open range then, no real improvements. You've accomplished a lot in 3 years." A small smile touched his lips. "Been working toward it my whole life. My father ran cattle on a small spread in Wyoming when I was growing up. Always dreamed of having my own place someday." "What brought you to Oregon?" "The land, mainly. Good grass, reliable water, and fewer big operations trying to crowd out the smaller ranchers." He glanced at her curiously. "What about you? Have you always lived in Pendleton?" "Born and raised there," Leila confirmed. "My parents moved west from Missouri before I was born, looking for opportunity like so many others. My father opened the store when I was about 5 years old. It's all I've ever known." "Ever wish for something different?" The question caught her off guard. "Sometimes," she admitted after a moment. "I love my father and the store has provided us a good living, but there are times I've wondered what else might be out there." She smiled ruefully. "Though I never imagined what else would include witnessing a murder and going on the run." "Life has a way of surprising us," Roy agreed, his tone suggesting he knew something about unexpected turns of fate. They lapsed into comfortable silence as the terrain grew more rugged. After about an hour's ride, they approached a series of low hills dotted with scrub brush and rocky outcroppings. Roy signaled a halt. "The mine entrance should be just over that ridge," he explained, pointing. "We'll leave the horses here and proceed on foot, quieter that way." They dismounted, tethering their horses in a small grove of juniper trees that provided both shade and concealment. Roy checked his revolver, ensuring it was fully loaded, and handed Leila a small derringer from his saddlebag. "Just in case," he said quietly. "Hope you won't need it." Leila accepted the tiny gun, its weight unfamiliar but somehow reassuring in her palm. "I've never fired one," she admitted. "Simple enough. Point and squeeze the trigger, but stay close to me and let's hope it doesn't come to that." With Matt bringing up the rear, they made their way carefully up the rocky slope. Near the crest, Roy motioned for them to get down. They crawled the last few yards, peering cautiously over the ridge. Below them lay a small clearing with the dark mouth of the mine entrance visible in the hillside. A weathered wooden structure framed the opening, partially collapsed on one side. What caught their attention immediately, however, was the presence of 2 horses tethered nearby and the fresh tracks of a wagon in the dusty ground. "Someone's here," Roy whispered. "Recently." As if to confirm his words, 2 men emerged from the mine entrance. Even from this distance, Leila recognized Deputy Hargrove's distinctive build and the way he carried himself. The other man was stockier, wearing the dusty clothes of a laborer. "That's Hargrove," she whispered. "And the other one is Miles Dutton. He works at the livery stable." They watched as Hargrove handed something to Dutton, money, by the look of it, and said something that made the other man nod vigorously. Then both men mounted their horses and rode away, heading in the direction of Pendleton. "They've hidden something in there," Matt murmured. "Want to bet it's Cooper's body?" "Let's find out," Roy said grimly, "but carefully. They might have left someone behind to stand guard." They waited several minutes after the riders disappeared from view before making their way down to the mine entrance. Roy insisted on going in first, lighting a small lantern he'd brought and drawing his revolver. Leila and Matt followed close behind, their eyes struggling to adjust to the sudden darkness. The mine tunnel extended about 50 feet into the hillside, before opening into a larger chamber where the silver ore had once been extracted. The air was cool and damp, smelling of earth and something less pleasant that Leila didn't want to identify. "There," Matt said softly, pointing to a disturbed area of ground along one wall of the chamber. The earth had been freshly dug and replaced, forming a rectangular mound about the size and shape of a man. A crude wooden cross had been placed at one end, an attempt to make it look like a proper burial rather than a hidden grave. "Should we?" Matt gestured uncertainly toward the mound. Roy hesitated, then nodded grimly. "We need to be certain." Using a shovel that had been left against the wall, Matt began carefully removing the loose dirt while Roy held the lantern higher. Leila stood back, steeling herself for what they would find. It didn't take long to uncover enough to confirm their suspicions. The pallid face of a man in his early 30s emerged from the soil, his features contorted in a final expression of pain. A massive bruise covered one side of his head, and dried blood crusted his nose and mouth. "That's him," Leila confirmed quietly, her voice steady despite the horror of the sight. "That's Mr. Cooper, the schoolteacher." Roy knelt for a closer look. "Multiple blunt force injuries," he observed. "Beaten to death just as you described." He pointed to the man's hands, which were visible near his chest. Defensive wounds on his knuckles. He fought back. "What do we do now?" Matt asked, leaning on the shovel. "We've seen enough to confirm what happened," Roy said, standing. "Let's cover him back up out of respect, but we'll mark the location clearly. When we return with the federal marshal, we'll need to be able to find this place again easily." As Matt began replacing the dirt, Leila turned away, unable to watch. She wandered a few steps toward the mine entrance, needing a moment to collect herself. That's when she noticed the papers. Partially concealed behind a fallen timber near the entrance lay several sheets of what appeared to be official documents. Curious, Leila bent to retrieve them. "Roy," she called softly, "look at these." He joined her, holding the lantern close as she spread the papers out. They were land deeds and property transfers, all bearing Cooper's signature but dated after Leila had witnessed his murder. "Forgeries," Roy muttered, examining the documents. "And look at this. They're transferring Cooper's homestead claim and some other properties to a company called Pendleton Development Corporation." "I've never heard of it," Leila said. "I have," Matt offered, coming up behind them. "It's a new outfit, supposedly bringing progress to the area. Word is they're buying up land all around town, especially along the proposed railroad route." Roy's eyes narrowed. "And who owns this corporation?" "Don't know for sure," Matt admitted. but rumor has it Hargrove's heavily involved, along with some of the wealthier merchants in town. So they killed Cooper for his land, Leila said, the pieces falling into place. And they're using forged documents to transfer ownership after his death. Which means this isn't just about silencing a witness anymore, Roy realized. This is about money and power. And it makes me wonder if Cooper was their first victim. We need to take these, Leila said, gathering up the papers. They're evidence. Roy nodded. Carefully, don't damage them. He helped her fold them and tuck them securely inside her coat. Let's get out of here. We've found what we needed, and I don't like the idea of Hargrove or his men returning while we're still here. They left the mine exactly as they'd found it, covering their tracks as best they could. The ride back to the ranch was tense but uneventful, each of them lost in thought about what they'd discovered. It was late afternoon when they returned. Roy immediately called Hank, Lewis, and Tom together to share what they'd found and finalize their plan to rescue Leila's father. Lewis, Roy addressed the young Mexican vaquero, you understand what you need to do. You'll go into town as we discussed, find Mr. Evans at his store and give him Leila's note. Then arrange to meet him outside town after dark and bring him here. Lewis nodded, his dark eyes serious. Patron, I understand. I will be careful. What about the evidence we found? Leila asked, indicating the documents they'd recovered. We keep it safe for now, Roy decided. Tomorrow, Hank will ride to La Grande to bring Marshal Wilson back here. With your testimony, these forged documents and Cooper's body will have enough to bring charges against Hargrove and whoever else is involved. And my father, Leila pressed. Once he's here, he'll be safe, Roy assured her. We have enough men and weapons to defend the ranch if necessary. He looked around at his assembled hands. But I want to be clear about what we're doing here. Standing against Hargrove and his men could be dangerous. If any of you want no part of this, I'll understand. I'm in, Matt said immediately. Me too, Tom added firmly. Hank just gave Roy a look that said he didn't even need to ask. Lewis straightened his shoulders. For Miss Evans and her father, I will help. Leila felt a wave of gratitude toward these men who were willing to risk themselves for her and her father. Thank you, she said simply, her voice thick with emotion. All of you. Roy nodded, satisfied. Lewis, you should head out now. It's about an hour's ride to town, which will put you there before sundown. The rest of us will prepare for your return. As Lewis departed, Sarah arrived to help prepare the evening meal. Leila joined her in the kitchen, grateful for the distraction of practical work after the tension of the day. Roy told me what you found at the mine, Sarah said quietly as they peeled potatoes together. That poor teacher. And those awful men, thinking they could get away with such a thing. They might have if I hadn't happened to see them, Leila reflected soberly. How many others might they have hurt that no one knows about? Too many, probably, Sarah sighed. Men like Hargrove count on people being too afraid to stand up to them. She glanced at Leila with newfound respect. Not many would have the courage to do what you're doing. I'm terrified, Leila admitted, but I keep thinking about Mr. Cooper. He was new in town, came to teach our children. He didn't deserve what happened to him. And neither do you deserve what's happening to you, Sarah pointed out gently. Yet here you are, fighting for justice instead of running away. She smiled. I've noticed Roy watching you, you know. He admires courage like yours. Leila felt a blush warming her cheeks. He's been kind to help me. All of you have. It's more than kindness with Roy, Sarah said knowingly. I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you when he thinks no one's watching. Before Leila could respond, the door opened and Roy himself entered the kitchen. Everything all right in here? He asked, his gaze lingering on Leila's flushed face. Just fine, Sarah answered cheerfully. Dinner will be ready in about an hour. Good. Leila, could I speak with you for a moment? She followed him onto the porch, where the evening was cooling pleasantly as the sun began its descent toward the western hills. I wanted to make sure you're holding up all right, Roy said, studying her with genuine concern. It's been a difficult day. I'm managing, Leila assured him. Worried about my father, but hopeful Lewis will bring him safely. Roy nodded. Lewis is reliable and clever. If anyone can get your father out of town unnoticed, it's him. He hesitated, then added, I also wanted to say, I admire how you've handled all this. Many would have broken under the strain. I've had help, she said softly, looking up at him. Your help. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't found me in that hayloft. You'd have found another way, Roy said with conviction. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for. Their eyes met and held for a long moment. Leila became acutely aware of how close they were standing, of the warmth radiating from his tall frame, of how his eyes seemed to deepen in color as they looked at her. Roy took a small step closer. Leila, the sound of approaching riders interrupted whatever he had been about to say. Both turned quickly toward the sound, tension immediately returning. Stay here, Roy instructed, his hand moving to his revolver as he stepped off the porch. Hank emerged from the bunkhouse, rifle in hand, and Matt appeared from the barn similarly armed. They flanked Roy as two riders came into view. To everyone's relief, it was Lewis, accompanied by an older man with a lined face and silver-streaked dark hair, Leila's father. Father! She cried, ignoring Roy's instruction to stay put and running toward the riders. Leila Evans dismounted somewhat stiffly, his face breaking into a smile of profound relief as his daughter flew into his arms. Leila, he breathed, holding her tightly. Thank God you're safe. I've been out of my mind with worry. I'm fine, Father, she assured him, pulling back to examine him anxiously. Are you all right? They didn't hurt you? No, he said. That deputy came asking questions, but I told him I hadn't seen you since morning. Wasn't hard to act worried since I genuinely was. His expression darkened. Then I heard whispers about Cooper being missing when your message came. He looked over at Lewis. This young man risked a great deal to bring me here. Roy stepped forward, extending his hand. Mr. Evans, I'm Roy Jenkins. Welcome to my ranch. Leonard shook his hand firmly. My daughter's note says you've been protecting her. I'm in your debt, sir. No debt, Roy assured him. Your daughter witnessed something terrible and had the courage not to look away. The least I can do is help ensure that courage doesn't cost her her life. They all moved inside, where Sarah had set extra places at the table. Over dinner, Leila and Roy explained everything they'd discovered about Cooper's murder and the land scheme that appeared to be behind it. Leila Evans listened with growing concern. I've heard rumors about this development corporation, he confirmed. They've been buying properties all through town and surrounding areas. Several small homesteaders sold out recently under circumstances that seemed pressured. Pressured how? Roy asked sharply. Accidents, mysterious fires, livestock dying suddenly. Leonard shook his head. Nothing that could be proven as deliberate, but too many coincidences for comfort. Cooper refused to sell, Leila realized. So they killed him and forged his signature on the transfer documents. And they'll do the same to anyone who stands in their way, her father added grimly. Including us, now that you've witnessed what they did. Which is why we're sending for Marshal Wilson tomorrow, Roy reminded them. With the evidence we've gathered and your testimonies, we can put a stop to this. If we live that long, Leonard said soberly. Hargrove won't give up easily, and he has powerful friends. So do we, Roy countered, looking around at his loyal ranch hands. My men are good with rifles, and this ranch is defensible. We'll keep watch tonight and send Hank to La Grande at first light. After dinner, Roy showed Leonard to a small guest room where he could rest. The older man was clearly exhausted from the stress and the unaccustomed horseback ride. Left alone again, Roy and Leila found themselves back on the porch, watching as darkness settled fully over the ranch. Stars emerged in the clear night sky, countless pinpricks of light against the vast blackness. "Your father seems like a good man," Roy observed. "He is," Leila agreed. "Though this past day must have been terrible for him. His heart isn't strong and worry takes a toll." "He's safe now," Roy reassured her, "and soon this will all be over." "Will it?" Leila wondered aloud. "Even if Marshal Wilson arrests Hargrove and his men, what about the others involved in this development scheme? How far does it reach?" Roy considered this. "That's a fair question, but one step at a time. First, we focus on bringing Hargrove to justice for Cooper's murder. The rest will follow." They fell silent, the peaceful night at odds with the danger they knew still lurked. Leila found herself drawn to Roy's solid presence beside her, the quiet strength he emanated without effort. "Before we were interrupted earlier," she said softly, "you were going to say something." Roy turned to look at her, his expression difficult to read in the dim light from the window behind them. "Was I?" he asked, his voice equally soft. "I thought so." He was quiet for a moment. "It's not the right time," he finally said. "There's too much happening, too much at stake." "Sometimes," Leila ventured, her heart beating faster, "the most important things need to be said exactly when everything is uncertain." Roy took a step toward her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him against the cooling night air. "Leila," he began hesitantly, "I know we've only just met and the circumstances are." He shook his head, seemingly frustrated with his own words. "What I mean to say is, the sharp crack of a rifle shot cut through the night, followed by the splintering of wood as a bullet struck the porch railing mere inches from where they stood." "Get down!" Roy shouted, instantly pulling Leila to the floor of the porch as a second shot rang out. The ranch erupted into action. Hank's voice called out orders from somewhere near the bunkhouse, and Leila could hear the sounds of men taking defensive positions. "Stay low," Roy instructed, drawing his revolver. "Crawl inside and stay away from the windows." "What about you?" she asked, fear evident in her voice. "I need to help coordinate our defense." His eyes met hers intensely. "Go, now," Leila complied, crawling through the door Roy held open for her. Inside, she found her father already awake and alert, Sarah at his side. "What's happening?" Leonard demanded. "We're under attack," Leila explained quickly. "Hargrove must have followed Lewis back to the ranch." More shots rang out, now being returned by Roy's men. The familiar voice of the deputy carried through the night. "Jenkins, we know you've got the Evans woman and her father in there. Send them out and no one else needs to get hurt." "Not likely, Hargrove," Roy's voice responded from somewhere outside. "You're trespassing on my property and firing on innocent people. I suggest you leave while you still can." A harsh laugh answered him. "There are 10 of us, Jenkins." "How many men do you have?" 5, 6. "Be reasonable." Inside, Leila exchanged worried glances with her father. The odds didn't sound good. "What can we do?" she whispered. Leonard's expression was grim but determined. "We can fight," he said, surprising her. From his pocket, he produced a small revolver. "Lewis advised me to bring this, just in case." Leila remembered the Derringer Roy had given her earlier, still tucked into her pocket. "I have one too," she admitted, "but I've never fired a gun before." "Let's hope you won't need to," her father said. "But if it comes to it, point and squeeze the trigger. And aim for the center of the body. It's the largest target." The exchange of gunfire continued outside, sporadic but intense. Leila could distinguish the deeper boom of shotguns mixed with the sharper report of rifles and revolvers. "We should help somehow," she insisted, hating the feeling of cowering inside while others risked their lives for them. Sarah, who had been peering cautiously through a small window, suddenly spoke. "They're trying to circle around to the back of the house," she reported. "I can see movement by the corral." Leila joined her at the window, careful to stay to the side as Roy had instructed. In the dim moonlight, she could indeed make out several figures moving stealthily toward the rear of the house. If they get inside. Her father began worriedly. "There's a rifle in Roy's room," Sarah said. "And ammunition. Tom taught me to shoot years ago." The three of them hurried to Roy's bedroom, where Sarah retrieved a Winchester repeating rifle from a cabinet. She checked it expertly, confirming it was loaded, and handed it to Leonard. "You take this," she said. "I'll use the shotgun from the kitchen. Leila, you keep that Derringer ready, but stay back as much as possible." They positioned themselves with Leonard covering the back door, Sarah watching the front and Leila in between, ready to assist either one as needed. The gunfire outside had diminished somewhat, suggesting a standoff rather than active fighting. Then came a crash from the back of the house, someone attempting to force the door. Leonard raised the rifle, aiming steadily despite his age and health. "Step away from the door," he called out firmly. "I've got a Winchester trained on it and I know how to use it." A pause, then another crash as the door frame splintered. Leonard fired, the sound deafening in the confined space. A cry of pain followed, then the scramble of retreating footsteps. "Got him," Leonard said grimly. "Not killed, I think, but wounded." "Father, be careful," Leila pleaded, concerned for his heart under such strain. "I'm fine," he assured her, though his face was pale. "Better this than letting those murderers take us." Outside, the gunfire had intensified again. Suddenly, there was a new sound, a whoosh followed by the crackle of flames. Sarah rushed to the front window. "They've set fire to the barn," she cried. The wooden structure was already engulfed, flames leaping high into the night sky, casting an eerie orange glow over the ranch yard. In the illumination, Leila could see Roy and his men taking cover behind water troughs, fences, and outbuildings, exchanging fire with Hargrove's men who were similarly concealed. "They're trying to drive us out," Leonard realized. "If the fire spreads to the house." As if on cue, there was a clatter on the roof, followed by the unmistakable smell of smoke. Hargrove's men had apparently thrown torches onto the shake's shingled roof. "We need to get out," Sarah said urgently. "The house will go up fast once those flames take hold." "But they'll be waiting for us," Leila protested. "Better to take our chances fighting than burn alive," her father countered grimly. Sarah moved quickly to the door. "I'll signal to Tom and the others that we're coming out. Be ready to run for cover." Before she could open the door, however, there was a new sound from outside, the thunder of many hooves approaching rapidly from the direction of town. More of Hargrove's men, Leila wondered fearfully. But the gunfire had paused, both sides apparently confused by this new development. Through the window, Leila saw a large group of riders entering the ranch yard, at least 20 men, all armed. At their head rode a tall figure she recognized even in the uncertain light, Marshal Wilson from La Grande. "This is U.S. Marshal Wilson," a commanding voice called out. "Throw down your weapons and identify yourselves." There was a moment of confused shouting, then the sound of several guns being dropped. Roy's voice rang out clearly. "Roy Jenkins here, Marshal. These men attacked my ranch. Deputy Hargrove from Pendleton is leading them." "Hargrove." The marshal called. "If you're out there, show yourself. You and your men are surrounded." A tense silence followed. Then, from behind a water trough, Deputy Hargrove slowly stood, his hands raised. "This isn't what it looks like, Marshal," he called out, his voice betraying nervous tension. "We were pursuing fugitives, the Evans woman and her father. They're witnesses in a case. A case of murder, Roy countered loudly. We have evidence that Hargrove and others killed the schoolteacher, Cooper, for his land. Marshal Wilson dismounted, his men quickly taking control of the situation, disarming Hargrove's followers. Everyone stay calm, he ordered. We'll sort this out properly. Inside the house, Leila, her father, and Sarah looked at each other in stunned relief. How did the marshal get here so quickly? Leila wondered. And with so many men? Her father added. They cautiously opened the front door. The scene outside was one of controlled chaos, the barn still burning, though several men were already forming a bucket line to prevent the fire from spreading. Hargrove and his men being disarmed and restrained. Roy and his ranch hands emerging from their defensive positions, looking battered but undefeated. Marshal Wilson approached the house, recognizing Leila from previous visits to Pendleton. "Miss Evans," he greeted her with a nod. "Your message reached me faster than expected, it seems." "My message?" she asked, confused. "We were planning to send for you tomorrow." "Not according to the telegram I received this afternoon," the marshal replied, equally puzzled. "Signed with your name, telling me about Cooper's murder and Hargrove's involvement. Asked me to come to Jenkins' ranch immediately." Roy joined them, a streak of soot across his face and a small bloodstain on his sleeve where a bullet had grazed him. "I didn't send any telegram," he confirmed, looking as confused as Leila felt. "I did," came a new voice. The undertaker, Simmons, stepped forward from among the marshal's group. "After Miss Evans ran from town, Hargrove came to me with Cooper's body, wanted me to bury it secretly. Said if I talked, I'd end up the same way." He removed his hat, twisting it nervously in his hands. "But I couldn't live with myself being part of such a thing. When I heard Hargrove planning to come after you folks tonight, I sent the telegram to Marshal Wilson myself, signing it with Miss Evans' name to ensure it got immediate attention. And I gathered every deputy and reliable man I could find," Wilson added. "Rode hard to get here before anything worse happened." "You arrived just in time," Roy acknowledged gratefully. "They were trying to burn us out." The marshal's expression hardened as he surveyed the burning barn and the bullet-pocked walls of the house and outbuildings. "Hargrove will hang for this," he said grimly, "and anyone else involved in Cooper's murder and this attack." "We have evidence," Leila told him, explaining about the forged documents they'd found at the mine and Cooper's hidden grave. "And I witnessed the murder myself." "That's more than enough to make a case," Wilson assured her. "I'll need formal statements from all of you, but that can wait until morning. For now, let's get this fire under control and tend to any wounded." The rest of the night passed in a blur of activity. The barn couldn't be saved, but they managed to prevent the fire from spreading to other buildings. 3 of Hargrove's men had been wounded in the gunfight, one seriously, while Roy's side had escaped with only minor injuries. By dawn, Hargrove and his men were securely restrained, the fires extinguished, and a semblance of order restored to the ranch. Marshal Wilson had sent riders to Pendleton to arrest several prominent businessmen implicated in the land scheme based on the documents they'd recovered. Leila found Roy sitting alone on the porch steps, watching the sunrise. He looked exhausted but relieved, the danger finally passed. She sat beside him, their shoulders almost touching. "Your arm," she said softly, noticing the makeshift bandage. "Is it bad?" "Just a graze," he assured her with a tired smile. "Had worse from tangling with ornery steers." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the cool morning air refreshing after the smoke and tension of the night. "I never got to thank you," Leila finally said, "for everything. Taking me in, protecting me and my father, risking your life and your home." Roy turned to look at her, his eyes serious despite his fatigue. I meant what I was trying to say last night before we were so rudely interrupted. He took her hand gently in his. I know it's been only 2 days, which makes no sense at all, but there's something between us, Leila, something I've never felt before. Leila's heart quickened. I feel it too, she admitted softly. From the moment you found me in that hayloft and told me I was safe with you. Roy's fingers tightened around hers. I don't know what happens next. You and your father will need to give statements, testify at trials. It could be complicated for a while. And after that, Leila asked, hardly daring to hope. A smile spread slowly across his face, warming his eyes. After that, I was hoping you might consider staying, not just for a while, but permanently. Are you asking me to marry you, Roy Jenkins? Leila asked, a mixture of surprise and joy in her voice. I reckon I am, he admitted, looking suddenly nervous. I know it's sudden and probably foolish. Leila silenced him by leaning forward and pressing her lips gently to his. The kiss was brief but full of promise, a beginning rather than an end. Yes, she whispered as she pulled back. Yes, I'll stay. Roy's face lit up with happiness that banished all traces of fatigue. He pulled her close, his strong arms encircling her as the sun continued its ascent, bathing the damaged ranch in golden morning light. A new day, a new beginning. Behind them, the door opened and Leonard Evans stepped onto the porch. He took in the scene before him with a knowing smile. I see you two have come to an understanding, he observed mildly. Leila turned, blushing but not moving from Roy's embrace. Father, Leonard held up a hand. No need to explain, Leila. I may be old, but I'm not blind. I've seen how you look at each other. His smile widened. And I approve. Mr. Jenkins has proven himself a man of character and courage, exactly the kind of man I've always hoped you'd find. Thank you, sir, Roy said, standing and extending his hand respectfully. I promise to take care of her and make her happy. I believe you will, Leonard replied, shaking Roy's hand firmly. And perhaps you wouldn't mind taking on a partner in that general store. I'm not getting any younger, and running it alone has become rather tiring. A partner would be most welcome, Roy agreed readily. Though I'll need to divide my time between the store and the ranch. Details we can work out later, Leonard said with a wave of his hand. For now, I believe the marshal is looking for us. Time to make our statements and set the wheels of justice in motion. The next few weeks were indeed busy and complicated. Marshal Wilson conducted a thorough investigation that uncovered an extensive conspiracy, reaching into the highest levels of Pendleton's government and business community. Hargrove and 3 others were charged with Cooper's murder, while nearly a dozen prominent citizens faced charges related to the land fraud scheme. Leila and her father returned to Pendleton, reopening the store which had been closed during their absence. Roy divided his time between the ranch and town, overseeing repairs to his property while also helping at the store and courting Leila properly. Their courtship, though brief by conventional standards, was made sweeter by the shared experience that had brought them together. Roy would often ride into town bearing small gifts, wildflowers, a book of poetry, once even a kitten found in his barn that he thought might make a good mouser for the store. When he proposed formally, 3 months after the night they'd met, it was on the exact spot where he'd found her hiding in Peterson's hayloft. He'd arranged with his friend to have the barn to themselves, decorating the loft with lanterns that cast a warm, golden glow over the hay. This is where our story began, he told her, down on one knee with a simple but beautiful diamond ring in his hand. Where I found a woman with more courage in her heart than anyone I've ever known, where I promised you'd be safe with me. His eyes shone with emotion. I want to make that promise for a lifetime, Leila Evans. Will you marry me? Yes, she answered without hesitation, tears of joy spilling onto her cheeks. 1,000 times, yes. They were married in October 1884 when the hills around Pendleton were painted with the gold and crimson of autumn. The ceremony was held at Roy's ranch, their ranch now, with Marshall Wilson standing as his best man and Sarah as Leila's matron of honor. Leonard gave his daughter away with pride and joy evident in every line of his face. The trials of Hargrove and his conspirators concluded that same month, resulting in convictions all around. Justice had been served, though the cost had been high. Cooper's life, the danger to Leila and her father, the damage to Roy's ranch. But from those dark events had come unexpected blessings. Not just Leila and Roy's love, but positive changes for Pendleton itself. With the corrupt officials removed, honest men and women stepped forward to lead. The town began to prosper in legitimate ways, the railroad coming through as planned but benefiting everyone, not just a select few conspirators. Roy and Leila divided their time between the ranch and town, with Leonard managing the store most days while they handled the ranch operations. They expanded both businesses gradually, adding a millinery section to the store that Leila oversaw personally, and increasing the cattle herd to over 500 head. Their first child, a son they named William after Roy's father, arrived in the summer of 1886, bringing new joy to their growing family. Leonard delighted in his role as grandfather, spending hours rocking the baby and telling him stories about his brave mother and steadfast father. On the first anniversary of their meeting, Roy took Leila back to Peterson's barn, where they climbed up to the hayloft and sat together in the sweet-smelling hay. "If I had to do it all over again," he told her, his arm around her shoulders, "I wouldn't change a thing. Every danger, every risk was worth it to have you in my life." Leila rested her head on his shoulder, thinking of all they'd been through and all that lay ahead. "When you found me here that day, terrified and bleeding, I never imagined I was meeting the man I would spend my life with. And I never imagined finding such a treasure hidden in the hay," Roy replied with a smile, kissing her softly. "My brave, beautiful wife. My protector, my love," she whispered back, "who kept his promise that I would be safe with him." As twilight deepened outside the barn, they remained there in the hayloft, remembering how their story began and celebrating all it had become, a love born in danger but flourishing in peace, a partnership that had overcome threats and violence to build something beautiful and lasting. And in the years that followed, whenever Leila found herself facing difficulties or doubts, she would remember the words that had changed her life on that fateful day. "You're safe here with me." In Roy's arms, in their home, in the life they built together, she had indeed found safety, and so much more. She had found love, purpose, and the kind of happiness that comes from facing life's greatest challenges together and emerging stronger for having done so. Their story became something of a legend in Pendleton, told and retold over the years, how a schoolteacher's murder led to the exposure of corruption, how a woman's courage and a cowboy's protection blossomed into one of the great romances of the Oregon Territory, and how justice prevailed against seemingly impossible odds. But for Roy and Leila Jenkins, it wasn't legend or history, it was simply their life, their love story, beginning with a frightened woman hiding in a hayloft and a cowboy who promised her safety and delivered so much more.